has been so improbable, the impossible has happened. This one by Mattingly. Oh, hang on to the roof. Goodbye, home run. Don Mattingly. Taco waits one. Deep left field. Down the line. That ball is out of here.
What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of Tablesetters covering all things Major League Baseball. And today, I'm joined by someone whose work I genuinely rely on all year round through The Athletic. And one of my favorite pods, Rates and Barrels, Eno Sarris, has become one of the defining voices in modern baseball analytics, Stuff Plus. Talk about that, seam shifted wake, pitch design, all of that. If there's a frontier in the sport, Eno has certainly been the one mapping it. Eno, so great to have you here.
Hey, thanks for having me. Very kind words.
So before we dive into the big offseason story, so much to talk about. How has your November been? I know you're saying you're busy off air and all that. So have you actually gotten any downtime, or does baseball refuse to let you escape from this?
No, in fact, I've decided that, the best way to get out in front of next year is to just start on working on next year as soon as this year's over. So maybe a little bit ahead. I already have pitching ranks that I'm working on, and I'm just kind of combing through player lists and looking for outliers and looking for interesting players.
That's awesome to hear. And I heard you guys talk about this on Rates and Barrels, but I'd be remiss if I didn't ask over here on the fantasy side of things. Since half the industry pretty much defines their draft boards by the models you put out, how did your own fantasy season turn out? I'm always interested to hear about the Devil's rejects and all the things that happen in those leagues.
Yes, did not do well in that league. That's like a mammoth industry 20-team dynasty league. That one I need a little bit of help, but we have Junior Caminero in the middle of our infield, Jeremy Pena at short. We'll figure things out. We just need a little bit more to come together. It's actually on pitching. It's me. I've got to get the pitching together. So I'll get that done. I had a generally good year. My average finish was 4th out of 15 across all my leagues. Got a big win in the Great Fantasy Baseball Invitational, where I ended up 3rd out of 600 fantasy players that play that league. So I think I'm doing well. I did have this weird thing where there was a collection of leagues that I played that had the similar settings, and I got 2nd, 3rd, 4th, and 5th, which are like pretty good finishes, but I need a 1 there. I need a 1 in there, so I need to figure out my draft and hold. That's the draft and hold strategy. I've got a good one, but I need it to be just slightly bit better.
For sure. And the fantasy season's a war of attrition. If you guys are looking for all the coverage, if you're not familiar with Eno, make sure you guys check out everything he puts out in The Athletic. And of course, Rates and Barrels, like I mentioned. But, let's dive into everything that's been reshaping baseball right now. And the news that dropped yesterday was about the new media deals. And they didn't just move the broadcast around. They changed the way it introduces the sport to some different audiences. So ESPN has become the main digital outlet through MLB TV. NBC takes over the traditional national windows, and Netflix handles those high-profile events for the casuals. So when you look at that setup, do you think MLB is intentionally pushing fans towards a more nationally unified viewing experience, or is this more of a temporary patch while we just figure out what's next and how the viewer consumes baseball in the next 10 years?
Well, actually, it's a little bit of both. That's an interesting way to put it. When you said the first thing, I was like, yes, that's what Rob Manfred wants. He wants to have a national baseball package. He wants control of as many teams as possible, their TV rights in 2028. So he wants to be able to go out there with basically everything and shop to everyone. But also, he made a $1 billion mistake when he put an opt-out into the ESPN deal that allowed ESPN out of that deal $1 billion or $900 million early. And because of that, he had to go to work patching it up. And you're right, it is a patchwork. And I think it doesn't serve. I don't think it serves the viewer, man. It's pretty annoying. So I don't watch that much football anymore. But when I do watch football, I'm like, where is it? With the NBA, I still have, like a Hulu package that kind of replicates what cable used to be like. So I just turn on Hulu and, there's my local cable, I get to watch the Warriors. But, So the NBA somehow has avoided, even though they've made a lot of money and they're killing viewership money wise, they haven't made it as fractured as I feel like baseball and NFL have made it recently. And I don't like that fracture because I don't necessarily like, I'm annoyed that I cut the cable and I solved a lot of money. I saved a lot of money cutting the cable. That was like $250 a month at some point,
Yeah.
and I cut it down to Hulu, which was like $60 a month. And I was like, wow, that's great. And then I realized, well, now I got to have Peacock and I got to have Amazon and I got to have Netflix and that's what baseball is like, kind of making me do that. There are going to be games like Apple, I got to have Apple and like Roku. They made a deal with Roku. I got to have a Roku package. So I don't think it serves the average viewer that well, but it serves their pocketbooks because what you're doing is you're getting all those giant streaming services to the table. You're getting a little bit of competition for your services. And that's what Manfred is hoping in 2028. He gets to go back to all those different partners with basically all of the rights to all the teams and do something there. But, he's scrambling a little bit, man. He made a big mistake with that ESPN deal.
Yeah, we saw how ESPN's role is oddly shaped here. You mentioned it before, pushing back on the rights fees. They sparred publicly with Manfred. Manfred sparred publicly back with them, and they gave up the big showcase events. And in all of this, they kind of wound up gaining control of how most baseball fans consume baseball every day with the MLB TV package. Do you see this being more of a long-term truce between the league and Bristol, or does this feel more like a marriage of convenience, as we mentioned before, bridging the gap? MLB needs a reliable distribution partner, and ESPN needs live content that fits its budget. So what do you take from that?
ESPN is interesting because it is a channel as well as a streaming service. There's ESPN Plus, and it's trying to, along with the Hulu Disney package, try to basically recreate cable, dude. Like, what do you do? You get Hulu, and with Hulu, you get, HBO Max, and you get, So, I think that Manfred once said in the back and forth that ESPN was like a dying channel or something,
Yeah, that was this year. It feels like a million years ago, but it was this year, I believe.
And then he turns around and sells everything to them and has to get up there and be like, we're so happy to partner with ESPN, who's on the forefront of streaming and this and this and that. It's all about the money.
Oh, of course. And there's a little bit of nostalgia with the NBC piece over here in the weekly slot, and Netflix. We talked about taking over opening night and the home run derby. Now we have two distinct storytelling lanes, the traditional broadcast rhythm that NBC tends or wants to bring back, and the global event-driven approach. So first, the question here about what do you think NBC can bring back or completely rethink in a national baseball coverage that's been missing? Because everyone has complained about the ESPN games on Sunday night, how they're being shown that was part of the Manfred complaint about showcasing baseball and letting the stars be heard. Do you think NBC can do something different? Or if you were sitting in a seat in NBC, would you decide to do something different?
Well, it might be funny to hear this as an analytics nerd. I did not think that the Apple TV coverage was super compelling. There's a 32% chance of a hit here or whatever.
Right.
The numbers weren't actually well thought out. The model that they used wasn't great. And I don't think that it added that much to the user experience. I think that exit velocity is super important, but I also think that there are some broadcasts where they just automatically and that was 105 exit velocity with a 23-degree launch angle. And you're like, why did you just report that? That doesn't tell me anything about that homer. I don't really care. Unless it's well, that was the hardest hit homer of the year. And then you'd be
right.
Okay, all right, I'm interested now. That's part of a story. So I don't know. I don't think that, I don't really have an answer of what they should do, but I don't think that the Apple way was that great. What would you say sort of characterized the ESPN? Was that the mic'd up sort of aspect?
That and just the general, and again, this might be a misnomer, but a lot of fans of local teams feel like there's a misrepresentation of their ball club when they would watch them on ESPN, because obviously that was the same complaint in the postseason, where the local coverage, you just have an intimate relationship with those broadcasters because they know everybody and you're there every day with them, like a seat at the dinner table.
This is a tough one for me as a national writer. I know, fans of specific teams will sometimes know more than I do about that specific team, and it's just part of what makes it hard to do national coverage is that you have to know all 30 teams. You have to know all 40-man rosters. You have to know the top 10 prospects, a lot of players, a lot of situations. And so you'll miss something here or there. So I have a little bit I have a little bit of sympathy for those guys, but at the same time, I don't know why they can't include somebody from the broadcast team. There's got to be somebody from the radio or TV side that can be available for those games. Include somebody from either side, and then that could be a fun thing that they do is then, let's cut to our Brewers reporter, that's here. Maybe it can be a reporter, it could be somebody from the Athletic, it can be anybody associated with covering that team on a daily basis, and have them as opposed to, just a moderately handsome or attractive sideline reporter who's asking the manager, like, what did you think of blah, blah, blah pitching out there? It's like, he pitched really well and we're in the game. So, like, he's not going to tell you anything. Like, why do they do that? Why do they talk to the manager? The manager's not going to tell you anything really interesting.
Yeah, and I think a lot of the NBC piece, like I mentioned, the nostalgia, I'm hoping they bring some of that flair back. A lot of great moments happening on NBC, but let's shift the conversation. I'm sorry.
They had the whole, like, This Week in Baseball. Was that CBS?
NBC.
NBC, okay.
Yeah.
Well, this Week in Baseball seems like something that I miss. And if they can recreate some of that energy, I agree.
Yeah, and it's more about, as you mentioned in the opening, was the nationalization of baseball to be more of that global presence and having everyone sort of watch the casual game like the NFL seems to get. But let's shift over to the piece that you wrote about the 4 potential free agent bargains on The Athletic. And I thought it really highlighted how differently teams now approach risk, maybe potential certainty, and pitch design. So even with all the advancements in the models and projection systems, what do you think is still the biggest analytical blind spot in the free agency market? The place where teams tend to overestimate their confidence of a player's projections or maybe underestimate the uncertainty?
Yeah, that's another good question. One thing that popped out for me on Rates and Barrels that we recorded yesterday that'll go up on Monday. We were doing it with Trevor May, and we looked at the past biggest pitcher deals, and we looked at the best ones and the worst ones. And the best one, I think, if you close your eyes and think of it right now, I'll give you a second. The best one is Max Scherzer. Max Scherzer with the Nationals, signed for like $210 million, and was the ace that he was thought they could be, put up inning after inning, and was just everything they wanted him to be. And then, on the flip side, the worst deal was on that same team. Steven Strasburg signed a 7-year deal with them and never added another win above replacement. He added some few innings, but we're talking like 20 more innings, and his career was over. So, I tried to look at what was predictive. And I think what's funny is, so we have these models, and I myself have, the Stuff Plus model, and in the underpinnings of that is why in that piece I said Imai. I love Tatsuya Imai. He's got a fastball like Joe Ryan. He has the K- BB of Masahiro Tanaka, coming over from Japan. The worst case scenario, Kenta Maeda was still worth 10 to 12 wins, over his American career. So, I think in terms of worst case, middle case, and best case, which is sort of, Yusei Kikuchi or Kenta Maeda, Masahiro Tanaka, and Joe Ryan, you have if you're giving him $150 million, I think you're actually pretty good. If you're giving him $200 million, you're leaning into the risk there. But back to those deals, the good deals, the thing that set out the good deals and the bad deals, the good pitchers had about 150 more innings going into the day they signed theirs. And so if there is a blind spot, to me, I think some of it might be old school modeling, old statistics, boring statistics, like innings pitched. They're going to look in there and they're going to look at, the forearm layback and the scapula, and they're going to look at their biometric numbers, and they're going to look at the Stuff Plus, and they're going to do all this modeling. And I wonder if one person will raise their hand and be like, well, Imai only gave his team 430 innings over the last 3 years. How much do we think he can stand up to the rigors? And that ends up being a big component of how good a pitcher is for your long-term deal, is how often he's on the field.
Yeah, I thought the comparison to Joe Ryan's fastball shape was certainly interesting. And Tatsuya Imai is a guy that, You look at a guy, the big conversation, whatever team he signs with, it's going to be about translation from the MPB. How confident are you looking at all the projections of his stuff translating right away to Major League Baseball to adjust to big league hitters?
I feel pretty good about it. I mean, one thing you can say is that Roki Sasaki came over with a bad fastball shape. And you could say, you know, as good as I think that Ryan Comp is, the ball changes from Japan to America and movement changes. And let's say he loses a little bit of movement and it becomes a dead zone fastball like Roki Sasaki's. The difference, Roki Sasaki tried to make up with a velo and it worked as a reliever, but not as a starter. Imai has better command, I think, and he has a better, wider arsenal. So just in terms of, you know, like the soft skills, again, these things that used to really matter that have taken the back seat to stuff plus and strikeout rate and stuff like that. I think that they're there for Imai. So I believe in him, but you have to admit there is risk.
For sure. And if we're going to touch on the two other players you mentioned in those four potentially bargains, and a player that you have said, you know, standing out potentially as an unusual stable in his 30s is Alex Bregman. Which part of his offensive profile makes him age more gracefully than the typical hitter? And why do the models view his decline phase as more reliable than most of the players his age?
Well, there's been a consistency for him. So in terms of projections, the model doesn't have any zero win, any terrible season to pull in and push into the projections. He's been very good consistently year after year. The other thing that you can point at is that the defense came from a really high elite level. So even as it falls as he ages, he's still going to be a positive defensively for 3, 4, 5 years, I believe. And at the end of the deal, he might be a part-time player, maybe injured some, maybe having to move to second or whatever it is. But I have him being a regular all the way into the last year of the deal. And then the last thing that really helps, because he does not have the bat speed and the exit velocity of Aaron Judge and Juan Soto, and Shohei Ohtani, who signed these long-term deals for the big money. Bregman won't sign for that same money, and he isn't that kind of player. So you might be tempted to say, what happens as the bat speed declines? What I'll tell you is he is a professional at the plate. His strikeouts and his walks, you know, they've been really, really good, really steady throughout his career. And the biggest part is he doesn't chase. He doesn't chase at balls. And when you chase at balls, that contact on balls outside the zone ages worse than any other thing that a hitter can do. And so, you know, if you look at Josh Hamilton, Javi Baez, Pablo Sandoval, there's a host of players, even some guys who aged earlier than you thought, like Luis Robert Jr. You know, there are guys that chase too much outside the zone and they stop making contact and their strikeout rate goes through the roof. Bregman doesn't do that. He's a top 10 guy when it comes to plate skills in terms of not swinging at balls and swinging at strikes. He's not quite Joey Votto, but he's got some things in common with Joey Votto.
And also you mentioned Ryan Helsley. You talked about pitch tipping, not a drop in stuff, as the main cause of the volatility we saw in 2025. When you see a pitcher that grades out with the elite stuff plus, but also shows signs of some mechanical drift or the sequencing issues, how do teams distinguish between someone who's one adjustment away from potentially a huge rebound the next year and someone whose volatility points to a deeper, longer-term risk of the ones we're referencing before?
Yeah, I think there's an interesting guy that you can set up as an opposition to Dylan Cease. I mean, Dylan Cease, you're like, okay, what is the problem? Because the stuff numbers are good, the strikeout numbers are good, but every other year he's bad. Right. I would just posit that there are some command issues there, and he hasn't really shown the aptitude to add plus pitches on top of the fastball and slider. So if your plan for Dylan Cease is, oh, we'll just give him a kick change, you have to add in, it may not take, you know, because he's been around for a while and he's tried a whole bunch of different types of changeup grips, and they, you know, hasn't really had a good changeup. So, you know, I think that's one type of risk. With Helsley, you don't have to spend as many years. It's going to be probably a 1-year deal. So the threshold is way different. But when you see the strikeout rate, the velo, the stuff still being there, and you have, he said himself, pitch tipping issues, and then he had issues dealing with the new mechanics that he was put in place to do to get rid of the pitch tipping. We do have an interesting test case. Jesus Luzardo went through the same thing this year, and he had pitch tipping issues, and then he had issues with his new mechanics because of the pitch tipping issues, and he basically had a bad month in the middle of the season. I think that's an interesting number because after that month, he was fine. Luzardo finished the season fine. He was great. And Helsley didn't really have that month. He was trying to figure this all out in September. That was his month. And so I would posit that you give him an off season, he can figure this out because he has a long track record of being good otherwise. So I think he just needs to do this in a non-competitive environment and get comfortable and come back.
For sure. And I'm not saying it would be the case with Helsley, but do you buy into any of the stuff that is the narrative around New York of guys can pitch in New York or they can't? I'm not saying that was the reason for Helsley, but we saw it with Sonny Gray. He was a different pitcher with the Yankees and then went on to do amazing things of being who he was in Oakland. Is there something to that?
Well, I did a big piece with Sonny Gray about that, and he actually had some fault with the Yankees analytics, and and how that kind of was broadcast through the coaches. It was kind of like he said, "Well, they had me throwing crappy sliders." He used the S word, but he said I came back, to talk to him the day after the piece ran because it got aggregated in New York and everyone used that lineup. Yankees had me throwing, crappy sliders. I don't know what you're allowed to say on table.
You can say whatever you want, my friend.
All right. So he's like, there are all these headlines. The Yankees had me throwing shitty sliders. And I came back and I was like, hey man, I put that low. That wasn't my headline. I put that low in the piece. The piece was, I stand by the piece. He goes, oh, you're fine. Your piece was great. The only problem is, did you have to leave the cuss words in? But he basically said that like, they were like, oh, you have a great slider. You got to throw it in the zone more. And he's like, no, I have a great curveball. The slider is just me throwing the curveball harder. And if you have me do that in the zone, it just sort of spins and doesn't break. And so what he saw was a lack of interaction between himself, his feedback to the pitching coach and the R&D guys coming down saying, this is what you should do. He thought he didn't really have a say in the matter. And he kind of shut down at some point, I heard from other people. So, that I don't know how much that has to do with the media, situation or how big the market is, or if that's just specifics of coaches and how things are run. But I also have been in those clubhouses as a writer, and I know the difference. When the Yankees come to town, they have like 10 people on the road with them. When the Brewers come to town, there might be one member of the media that's in the clubhouse after games. So that's obviously a different situation. Most of the players, though, don't really want to talk to media. I've learned this over my career. And so I guess it's just, that would be more of a nuance, more of a nuisance actually to pitching in a big market, is knowing that. And I guess, the other thing is, if you are a young guy coming up in Milwaukee or Arizona or wherever, and you dominate, and then you get the big contract in New York, it's going to be really different because you go from that, oh, there might be one guy on the road, and you're a young guy. There probably was somebody that was the guy that had to take all the answers all the questions when you lost. There was the other clubhouse leader that took all the questions and took heat off you. And then when you take that big deal, you become the guy they come to and talk to, like, oh, your team's in a skid. Oh, you guys are sucking. Like, give us a quote for our article about how much you guys are sucking right now. And so that's got to be different for different people. But in terms of what happens on the field, my general philosophy is that to make it in the big leagues, you have to be pretty much clutch. You have to be able to handle, people saying mean things to you and crowds that hate you. And that's going to happen if you're in small or big markets, no matter what. So it's a little bit more about what happens in the clubhouse, what happens in terms of leadership, how you're quoted in the paper, that sort of stuff. But I don't know that always carries over to in between the lines. It's just that they might be portrayed differently once they get to the big market.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think it's about people digging deeper into the stories. It's so easy to say he couldn't play because it's New York. I think Yankee fans, Met fans wear that as a badge of honor, whereas you mentioned each case is a singular effort of like, this was the case for Sonny Gray. That might be the case for Ryan Helsley, and it might be the case for Randy Johnson or whoever else. But I think these things all sort of play themselves out. But you mentioned clutch, and let's talk about the postseason. And you covered a lot of that through The Athletic. You showed through your coverage that regular season home run totals really mean nothing in October, while barrel rate and contact ability actually were driving the results we were seeing. Toronto clearly being the best example. Elite contact with power when it counted. So Blue Jays showed that an elite contact floor paired with timely power can outperform the traditional homer-heavy approach when it matters in October. Do you think that becomes the new postseason blueprint? And should front offices start prioritizing that profile over simply maximizing the regular season home run output? Is this going to change and have some copycat teams out here?
Well, some of the stuff was not really that new. I mean, the barrels have been a powerfully predictive stat for a long time since they've come out in 2015. And I think teams have known that. If you just look at the team barrel rate leaders for last year, it's the Yankees, the Mets, the Dodgers, the Cubs. They're all at the top of the list, and they are progressive analytics driven teams that know that this is the best quality contact you can make. Seattle being sixth, that's one of the best they've ever had. But you have on the flip side, Milwaukee and Cleveland were 29th and 30th in barrel rate, but also, in the top 5 when it came to making contact. Cleveland did not have a very good offense, though. The San Diego Padres also had the second best strikeout rate in baseball last year, and they did not have a very good offense. And so I think it is nice to make more contact. The barrel rate is still the important thing. Hitting the ball hard is still the important thing. So I wouldn't be surprised. The Mariners have long said, oh, we need to make more contact. We need to make more contact. I wouldn't be surprised if there are teams that want to take a current power heavy approach and shave some strikeouts off of it. And in particular, when I look at a team like Baltimore that was 3rd in strikeout rate last year, or even a team like the Yankees that was 6th and the Mariners 7th in strikeout rate in terms of biggest strikeout rate by their hitters, those are teams that will see what Toronto did and will continue to try to shave some strikeout rate points off their strikeout rate.
So this postseason, we also saw some of the highest produced of the highest toot blend rates we've seen. So runners doubled off of routine liners, drifting too far on shallow flies, forcing extra bases in marginal situations. For those unfamiliar, toot blend is a term coined by Cubs blogger Tony Jewell back in 2008 to describe Ryan Terrio's base running, and it stands for thrown out on the bases like a nincompoop. Yes, that is the true stat here. So these things are spiking the postseason. Do you think this is a result of teams simply responding to rule-driven incentives for more aggression, or are we seeing a deeper strategy shift toward value and controlled chaos on the bases? And is this a useful stat that we have to use it through a lens of understanding that trend?
We saw more base runners thrown out between third and home this postseason than we'd ever seen in a postseason before. And that seems to be like the old school adage, don't make the first out at home. No, you don't want to make the out at home, that seems like you've made a mistake there. And we saw the opposite maybe decide game 7, where right, Isaiah Kiner-Falefa was not far enough off of third base. It was not aggressive enough and may have scored the winning run in the bottom of the 9th if he'd taken a bigger lead. So I think there are teams that are looking at their third base coaches' decisions through an analytical lens and are taking the stolen base rules and the bigger leads and what are now shorter base paths, basically, because the bases are bigger, and trying to dial up the aggression. And you see that dial up aggression with, the rates of stealing third. Those are up through the roof for some teams specifically, but for the whole league. But some teams have been out in front of that. And that was something you didn't really do in the past because you're already in scoring position. Why would you give up an out trying to get to third if you're already in scoring position? But teams, I think, have found that there is some value here in turning it up. And one way you can see it is just that we still haven't fully reacted to the new stolen base rules. We should probably still, and every year we're more aggressive in terms of stealing bases, and we still haven't quite reached that break-even point where we're making too many outs and we should stop taking off for second so often. So I think that they looked at this through an analytical lens and they decided we are not aggressive enough. And so they pushed it.
You mentioned the IKF moment, and we talked to Will Klein on the show for episode 117, and we were talking about all things World Series. But one of the things that was interesting as a fan, an objective fan with no rooting interest, was how each of the games felt interconnected. And that IKF moment seems to be a result of when Addison Barger was doubled off second. And it's so easy to get lost in the romanticism of baseball, but those little things, those decisions result. And I mean, you love baseball. I'm preaching to the choir here. How do you not fall in love with a sport that feels so interconnected in a way like that?
Yeah, it's just the little things that happen. And I mean, Yoshinobu Yamamoto got the MVP of the World Series, and he was amazing. And he did all that the day after he pitched them into Game 7. I mean, that is amazing. He could have been the GOAT. He could have given up the game, the run that, if IKF is a foot closer to home plate, then Yamamoto's the guy who blew it. So I mean, just the whole saga with Springer and his knee and his oblique, and just kind of gritting it out, and then just the whole up and down. That was a classic for the ages, I thought.
Sure.
And it reminded me a little bit of Cubs Guardians. That was a great one as well, that went to extra innings in Game 7 and gave us a champion we hadn't seen in 100 years. So, I think those two fall classics are ones that stand out for me.
Well, cover your ears, Cleveland fans. All it was missing was a rain delay. I feel like that was the thing. At all those moments, that all the drama that we're looking for. But you mentioned Yamamoto, and most of the data will show that starters almost always lose pitch quality on short rest, yet teams lean on them when it matters most. Yamamoto being that rare outlier who actually held and maybe even improved the stuff. How do you reconcile that contrast? And is this a sustainable October strategy, or something that only elite rotations or maybe outlier arms like Yamamoto can get away with it? And looking ahead, do you think the data will eventually push teams away from using starters on short rest, or will postseason urgency always outweigh the clear performance drop? Like, we have to get this guy. There's all these rest days, because it felt like Yamamoto was going out there no matter what happened.
Yeah, and Yamamoto was going out there no matter what happened because the bullpen was bad. And they didn't really trust their other options. And that's actually, I think, the hidden key in this factor is we were looking at like $500 million of starting pitching, when we were looking at the Dodgers versus the Blue Jays in the World Series. And their bullpens weren't very good. They weren't very good during the regular season. They weren't very good during the postseason. And so often it made sense to go to your Max Scherzer or your Yamamoto instead of your sixth reliever, your fifth reliever. But there's another hidden underlying factor, which is we've pushed bullpen workloads to further places than we've ever had in the history of the game. And we've pushed it basically to the point where it's almost 50-50, starters and relievers. There was a point at which it was like 80-20 and 90-10 starters and relievers back in the day. So now it's 50-50. And I had a friend who, did some work. He used to work in the Phillies front office, Louis Paulus. He wrote a piece about how every pitch your starting pitcher throws makes your bullpen better going forward. And so he talked about, and then I know another person, Russell Carlton, on Baseball Perspectives, he wrote a piece called "Every Pitch You Throw Makes You Worse." And he talked about over the course of the season, the fatigue factors are such that basically you just get worse over the course of the season. Now, think about these things in tandem, that we're pushing bullpens harder than we ever had, and that they are just basically getting worse over the course of the season. So no matter how good of a bullpen you put together on day one, and the Padres had an amazing bullpen on day one, by the time the postseason rolls around, all those pitchers are worse than they were on day one. And that's when they become, the math changes, and you're like, oh, maybe I'd rather use a starter than this reliever who has gotten consistently worse over the course of the season. Then you add in the fact that every time a batter sees a reliever in a postseason series, they get better at them. So let's say you have the choice between, I'm going to use my third best reliever against their best hitter for the third time this series, or I use my ace on 3 days rest, So that's why it's continuing to happen, is that they're using there are so many, it's almost impossible to kind of plan a postseason series now, because you have to think about how many times, like if I have a good lefty that I want to throw against Shohei Ohtani, I don't really want to throw that guy 4 times against Shohei Ohtani in 5 games. Like that, the math says that's a bad idea. So then I have to figure out, is there some other righty I can throw against Ohtani that has a good changeup or does this? Or, you have to kind of, you have people in front offices whose entire job it is to map out how you're going to use the bullpen over the course of this next 5-7 days.
And we mentioned the Yamamoto thing where he came in, and Devin was talking about this with Will Klein, like I mentioned, to do a cheap plug again for that episode. There was a watch party at where the Raptors play. And when Yamamoto was shown warming up in the bullpen, the air was let out of the building. There was a video showing all the fans. And looking at that, the analytics, all the things go aside. Like there's something about the emotion, even for the team standing on the other side, like we can't hit this guy. So there's something tied with that where he just felt like superhuman. And I don't know, that's the baseball feel, the old guys that are just going by gut. That stuff still kind of exists in the world we live in.
Yeah, I don't question at all that, him running out of that bullpen was scarier than, Ben Kasparius running out of the bullpen. And Scherzer, he isn't who he used to be, but, there's still a lot of respect for the name on the back of that jersey. And I'm sure, some clinched sphincters when he came into the game. So.
So we did watch some of the splitter usage surge this postseason. Yamamoto, as we mentioned, Gausman, Ohtani, Savage took my Yankees to school with that. They couldn't figure it out for the life of them. Hoffman, and unlike the sweepers, the pitch didn't collapse under the volume quite yet. Do you think we're entering a genuine splitter era? And what, in your view, makes this pitch resistant to overexposure, whether it's the seam shifted wake effects, the late depth, or the way it tunnels off high ride fastballs? What about this pitch makes it have longevity, or maybe it doesn't?
Well, I mean, one thing that was an old school, like why we didn't throw more splitters, was everyone said that it, caused injury. And, I did a big piece once where I went and interviewed Roger Craig, who taught all the Giants the split finger, and supposedly, got them all injured. And I love him because he's crass and says what he feels. And he's like, I'm not an idiot. I wouldn't teach them that if I thought they all got hurt. He's like, go back and look at the injuries. One guy got a comebacker in the shin. You think that was because he throws a splitter? And, so he kind of he's like, another guy tore his hamstring, not about a splitter, I'm pretty sure. So, when I looked at it, I couldn't find any sort of stark evidence that splitters led to more injury than anything else. And I think the modern environment is like, if it's really good for you while you're healthy, then throw it, and then you'll be injured like everybody else is in this game. So yeah. I think that's part of what held us back from doing it. But then you mentioned seam shifted wake, which is just a better understanding of how the seams contribute to movement that we have now. And when you can partner that with high-speed cameras, what you can do is you can engineer a pitch. Even if, let's say, you are a guy who throws breaking balls and you don't have the good natural movement in your wrist, it's called supinating. You don't supinate well, so you don't pull the window shade down well, and you don't throw changeups well. Well, now we can use high-speed cameras, fiddle around with the grip, an understanding of where we want those seams to gather to make certain movements, and create a pitch for you. Now, we're going to call those splitters, and so I'm going to say it's the year of the splitter, but they may not all be called splitters. Tim Lincecum's pitch on Baseball Savant is called a changeup. And that's because it's kind of a splitter. It's kind of a fosh. It comes off his weak fingers. There's Vulcan changes. Basically, I think that we're going to lean into changeups. It's going to be splitters. It's going to be Vulcans. It's going to be whatever it is. And that the reason why we can lean into changeups better now is this understanding of seam shifted wake and the high, like the data and the tech that we have. So I do think it'll be the year of split. Why does it work? And why does it work even though we've been throwing more and more of them? I do think it's partially training. Every splitter is a little bit different, so it's a little bit harder to train against a specific splitter. I think it's what you said also a little bit about tunneling. I think there's something about a splitter that just really comes out of the fingers looking like a fastball, probably because of the grip. One of the cues you can have is like, Wainwright used to throw his curveball with his finger off like this, right? And I'm not saying it still worked for him. I'm not saying it was a bad idea or whatever, but there are hitters that can kind of get a little cue where they see a little bit of flesh where they don't on other pitches. You know, they see a finger off, or they see something in the way that grip is happening. Like a splitter and a 4-seam fastball just kind of come out like that, you know? So it might look really similar coming out of the hand.
And just tricks them in the way it comes out. And we'll talk more about the stuff plus and all the pitch shape analysis. Want to get more into that. But you guys mentioned, and I believe you discussed this in an article as well about Emmanuel Clase and the situation that went on there with the betting and all that, about how even the small intentional acts can meaningfully shift potentially win probability and in turn the real financial value. And we'll talk about that. When you model the effect of those intentionally thrown pitches, did the size of the win probability drop to surprise you? And did the data point to a small isolated blip, or did it show that even subtle manipulations can have far larger consequences than most people assume? I laughed on Rates and Barrels when you guys said it's like throwing a bottle of water on a raging fire when they just lowered the thing down to 200 limit for a prop bet. But this was something that was, shocking in the baseball world in a lot of ways. But a lot of people are just like, what do you expect in a world that is driven by greed and money and all the things that we see here?
I think a smarter group of players and bettors, might still be able to pull off what they were trying to pull off, even with the limits. You could basically have a bot that, does a ton of $150 bets, $175 bets, and loses some bets intentionally so that you can't see that somebody has a crazy win percentage, just enough win percentage to make money, and not enough to kind of alert all the AI that's kind of out there searching for anomalous bets. So I do wonder, if there are people out there right now doing a better job of it, because, and this is what the problem with props is, I was actually surprised the win probability did not change much. The average change on one of those balls was 1%, which by the time Emmanuel Clase comes into the game, he's coming into games where the win percentage is 99%, so the teams that are in those positions usually win 99% of the time. And it's with the Clase, it's probably 99.5, right? Because he's so good himself. And so when he threw those balls, it would go down a 0.5%, a full percentage. One time it didn't even go down at all, because they were just going to win the game no matter what. And it just didn't move the needle at all. So that's the problem with props, is that you can have a player. It's really hard for a single baseball player, I think, to throw a game. If you think about it.
Right.
You could do, if you're Shohei Ohtani, you go 0 for 5 with 5 strikeouts. And you're like, aha, I threw the game, Dude, so what? There's Freddie Freeman and Mookie Betts. Like, there's all those other guys, like Yamamoto could have thrown a shutout, and Mookie Betts hit a homer. And so, it's harder to throw a full game. That's why the big betting crisis before this, the Black Sox, like that whole thing was, they had to have like 6 or 7 guys, to pull that off. And that in today's game, I think it's harder and harder, because as soon as you start getting 3 or 4 guys, you got to leak. Somebody's like, I'm going to tell you, I'm going to tell on you guys. I don't want to lose games on purpose. But props allow you to not really affect the outcome of the game very much, to the point where the actual pitches that Emmanuel Clase threw cost the Guardians $300,000. That's a pittance. That doesn't really mean that much in win probability. What did cost the Guardians a lot was losing Emmanuel Clase, who was worth, $20 to $30 million as a player.
Yeah.
So which one of those things is, it also mirrors how poor the decision making of Emmanuel Clase was. Like he had $1 million career. He had, tens of millions coming to him in his career, and he did this for tens of thousands.
Yeah, and I think the bigger issue obviously is sport wide. It's not just exclusive to baseball. It is all things of the NBA and Terry Rozier and the stuff with Chauncey Billups and all that. But that was the point I was going to make next. My follow-up here is Cleveland standing to lose tens of $millions in projected surplus value with Clase and also Luis Ortiz. That kind of hit barely moves the needle for some big market clubs, but for a team like the Guardians operating on such narrow margins, that could be so destabilizing. Like, how does removing that much low-cost, high-certainty pitching disrupt maybe a multi-year competitive window that was built about maximizing the value from those two controlled arms? It's devastating for them.
Yeah, because Emmanuel Clase would have been traded this offseason, and he would have been traded for something good. He would have been, somebody would have wanted him, if he was still pitching. And that's the way that the Guardians keep going, is they just keep trading. They keep trading guys as they get closer to free agency. Is how the Rays have worked, how the Brewers have worked. That's why there are Freddie Peralta rumors right now around the Brewers, And so, this will show up at some point. You don't know exactly when or how, but this definitely hurt the Guardians. And I feel for them as an organization. You have the Rays losing, a shortstop of the future that they were going to build around. That hurt them too. So, I want to be careful here. I don't want to blame those organizations in any way. It's really hard to do this, but I do think that scouting makeup is important. And these are edge cases where the makeup led to the worst possible outcome, and so you could say, hey, we're getting this guy on a discount. We know that there's a couple of things about here and here, and we don't like that we've heard about this, but otherwise we wouldn't get him. He's in this deal because of X, Y, and Z. You could look between the lines on the Grayson Rodriguez deal, and you can kind of read. You can kind of look and be like, why did this player go for this? And sometimes, scouting makeup is part of the questions surrounding it. But I think it's important. You think you have to do it. And you probably have to have somebody in your front office that says, are we sure it's worth it? And what is the percent likelihood that this is really bad makeup? And not just somebody who will annoy half the people in the clubhouse.
Yeah, and maybe it's more of just, like you mentioned, identifying a metric to find character concerns if there are there, and even predicting them, because we know some of these players are in systems from age 16 on, and it's hard they're developing as adults through a major league system. So
I have a piece on forward. This, coming because of Framber Valdez is the pitching guy this offseason. And he had a very public sort of makeup concern situation where he basically threw out his cap.
Yep.
And so, I have a piece coming on this with Chandler Rome where we're gonna talk about this. But the difficulty in scouting makeup is that everybody, the best way to do it, from what I hear talking to scouts and executives, is to kind of basically try to find out about the player's world and to talk to all the people that you can that know him around him. If they're young enough, teachers, coaches, players, all sorts of things. The problem is that each of those people you talk to is going to have an agenda. If you talk to a coach, do you think he wants his guy drafted in the first round? Yeah.
Of course. Yeah.
Never had a problem with him. Love him to death. He's the best. Works hard all the time. Please draft him in the first round and make my college look better in the rankings and stuff like that. You talk to friends, so the friends going to be like, oh yeah, he's such a dick. No, they're not. The one scout did say you'd be surprised what teammates would willingly put out there. So maybe there are people telling truth out there. Maybe you can kind of read between the lines what is not said and what is said. But I think it's one of the jobs of scouts that's most important right now, because scouts, like a lot of the stuff they used to do physically is done by the machines now. Does he run fast? You don't have to do the timer on the top stopwatch anymore. You don't have to do that. There's a machine that spits out how many feet per second the guy throws, so do you have to do bat speed anymore and be like, oh, he has good bat speed? No, I know, because I have a number for it, so makeup is one of those things that we should be repurposing our scouts to really focus on, I think. And it's one of the hardest things to do. And some scouts think it's impossible.
No, it's a very, very good point. And I think that's where the value is, because these are multi-million-dollar investments that you need to get it right, especially for a team like Cleveland, that there is really no margin for error. Team like Tampa. But let's head over to some of the advanced stuff that you're known for. You've helped bring Stuff Plus, bat speed, and pitch shape analysis into the mainstream. And you've shown why pitching models diverge. Stuff Plus stays predictive for relievers, but gets much noisier with the starters, while Pitching Plus tightens things by factoring the location, maybe the count, the handedness. When you compare Stuff Plus, Location Plus, and Pitching Plus, what do you think is the missing variable that makes Stuff Plus so reliable for relievers, but much tougher to interpret for the starters?
I think it's arsenal effects, it's interaction between pitches in the arsenal. And, when we traditionally think of tunneling as what happens between your fastball and your secondary pitch. Does your slider look like your fastball? But increasingly in this day and age, pitchers, especially starters, are not throwing their fastball as much. And we're just seeing the number of fastballs go down with every year. So we have to rethink tunneling to include tunneling between secondary pitches. Something I talked to Tyler Rogers about. Stuff Plus does not like Tyler Rogers, but Tyler Rogers had an excellent season for the Orioles this year. If you talk to Tyler Rogers, he said, well, I was throwing my changeup a lot, but, I ran into the Astros and they basically just took everything low because they were like, that's a changeup. I'm not going to swing at that. So what I did was I threw my sweeper to them. And the sweeper, what's funny about the sweeper, I don't know if people know this. Some people call it a slurve, whatever. The sweeper is not a slurve because the sweeper stays up. It is better. The better thing to say that, yes, the sweeper's been around forever. It's the Frisbee. So It's a Frisbee slider. It doesn't go down. It stays up. So what does he do? He throws a sweeper. They see it low. They think, oh, that's going to be below the zone. I'm taking a ball, except it's a sweeper. So it stays up and it's a called strike. And that's a form of tunneling. And that's a really interesting thing to think about with the modeling. Because you're like, if I'm modeling the stuff, I'm going to say, well, he's a lefty throwing a sweeper to a righty. Sweepers traditionally have big platoon splits. It's probably not a good idea to throw a big sideways pitch at a righty. He sees the ball forever. That's not a good pitch. You look at the changeup and you say, oh, that's a decent pitch, but the fastball's not that great. So, I could see how Stuff Plus says, he's okay, But when you start thinking about how these pitches interact, you're like, oh, all right, well, 94 from a lefty. There's not as many lefties in the league anymore. People aren't as used to seeing that. So that's actually more like 95. And now, if they want to spit on the changeup, he has this new sweeper that he can use to kind of tunnel off the changeup, basically. So that's why I think it's always been difficult to model starting pitchers. I think you think about how many young starting pitching prospects have come up and you've been excited about in the past and they haven't worked out. Stuff Plus usually helps us get a little better at that and say, oh yeah, Jacob Mizorowski probably going to work out. Great Stuff Plus. But what we're seeing now is there's a hype 7, I'm calling them 7 young pitchers that are coming up right now. Mizorowski is one, Cam Schlittler is one, Trey Savage is one. I don't know if I'm going to come up with all of them off the top of my head right now, but there are these really great starting pitchers that are all young, and I have them all ranked near each other. Chase Burns, Nolan McLean. Mm-hmm. You can even include Imai, but they all have great Stuff Plus. So the reason that one of those guys succeeds and one doesn't is going to have to do with how the pitches interact. How good are their pitches against lefties and righties? Do they have weapons against both? How much can they command each of those pitches? And that's where the nuance of analysis comes in. So with a reliever, they traditionally had 2 pitches. Now they're closer to 3 on average, but still it's not as much about the interaction as it is like, I'm going to blow you away with this fastball. And when you think it's a fastball, it's going to be a slider. That's the sort of traditional reliever package. That's where Stuff Plus shines because it's like, is the fastball a good shape? Is the slider a good shape? Are they good velos? This is a good pitcher.
So for the Trevor Rogers stuff is so interesting. I followed it very closely, obviously being a Yankee fan in division, but also I rostered him in 2 of my fantasy teams and he pitched so well, but there was a delay in the effectiveness. Is there something to that for you where maybe he's adjusting to being in Baltimore after being in Miami? Because we saw a completely different pitcher in 2025 when in 2024 it's over there.
Yeah, I mean, it's a 181 ERA in 109 innings. Like I think he was over his skis. But you can look at ERA estimators, and there's a 3.75 there, which is one of the best of his career. So there's a lot going on, and I think the sweeper was a big part of it. Like I said, playing off the changeup, he regained about a tick on his fastball, so that's got to be part of it. There's got to be something to do with sequencing and mm-hmm. when he, what pitches he used and what counts and how he went around things. But I will also say that there's a fair amount of over his skis. There's going to be some regression. I think if you were going to have me estimate like where he would go in my rotation, in the average rotation, I would say he's kind of like a 3.
Okay.
He pitched like an ace last year, and I don't want to take that away from him. I'm just saying that if I was planning going forward, I wouldn't necessarily be like, oh, Trevor Rogers pitches game 1 in the World Series for me.
Yeah, it's gonna be interesting for him this year. I have him keeping in my long-term keeper league, but I'm looking forward to seeing what the Orioles do and trying to solidify that. You mentioned the trade for trading away Grayson Rodriguez, so we'll see if they have other things up their sleeve. But let's talk about bat speed for a second. I feel like fans still get tripped up by that it's both a process and an outcome stat. Of course, measures the swing itself while predicting the damage it could create. Like Stuff Plus, it separates the pitch traits from results, and bat speed shows both the mechanics and potential production. So for the novice, what's the easiest way to explain how bat speed can measure both the hitter's mechanics and their ability to produce quality contact in the moment when it matters?
Well, I mean, you'd have to swing the bat fast to meet a pitch that's coming in fast. You know, homers, the average bat speed on a homer is 75 miles an hour. The average bat speed on a regular pitch is 71. So, you know, you swing the bat fast leads to power. All the guys who swing the bat the fastest are the biggest power hitters in the league. You know, the fastest bats in the league are Giancarlo Stanton, Shohei Ohtani, Nick Kurtz, like Aaron Judge, those guys. So bat speed matters and it leads to power, full stop. But, you know, I made a big mistake this year where I saw that Juan Soto's bat speed was down, you know, more than anybody. He was third. He had the third biggest drop in bat speed this year. So I went on foul territory and said, you know, it's possible that the top end power isn't there. He used to be a guy who hit in the 30s home run style. And then he went to New York and hit 41. I was like, maybe he'll just go back to, you know, 35 homers a year again. He'll still be an excellent hitter. It's elite plate discipline, blah, 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 blah. They cut it down to like Juan Soto's elite power is gone, you know, and put it on the airwaves. And so I took my lumps, but I also tried to learn from it. And there's a couple things going on there, which is the way that bat speed is measured at contact point. Juan Soto in Yankee Stadium went and got the ball further out in front. And so his bat speed looked like it was faster because it gave him longer time to get up to full speed. And then when he went to New York to City, he was like, oh, you know, this isn't a place where I necessarily want to sell out to hit homers. I want to spray the ball around again. So his contact point went back to where it used to be, where he sees the ball travel. And that made it look like the bat speed was down a little bit more than it was otherwise. His bat speed was down, but he also gets into good counts and could still get up to about 95% of his old bat speed in the right counts. And that's where bat speed is not only a process stat, but it is an outcome. Pitchers affect batters' bat speeds. You know, if you are in an 0-2 count, the average bat speed is like 3 ticks lower than it is in a 2-0 count, right? If you get fooled on a pitch, if you think it's slow and it is fast, your bat speed will be too slow. So, you know, what the pitcher is trying to fool the bat speed. Somebody like Robert Suarez has predictably kept bat speed totals down, and he's done it now for 3 years running. The way he does it, he throws a 99-mile-an-hour fastball away from lefty hitters. I think the only way for a lefty hitter to hit that is to let it travel. What happens when you let it travel? The bat speed is down. So, you know, that's where these new bat metrics are really exciting. And I'm happy to take my lumps and to be wrong and to try and lean out in front of this and to kind of show people what teams have been doing. Like, teams have been trying to create bat path grades that use the scoopiness of the swing, the angle, the tilt to describe who's a good hitter and who's not. And I've known that they've been working on these things for 3-4 years, and they still don't fully trust them, but they think they've gotten better over the last 3-4 years. We're just getting to that point publicly now. So I'm going to make mistakes because teams have made mistakes.
Right.
Teams have told me, oh yeah, we drafted that guy on a bat path grade, and yeah, he sucks, and we messed up. I think it's worthwhile for people to see me kind of try to learn, try to be on the forefront of this. That's what we do at Rates and Barrels. DVR, my co-host, sometimes is like, you with the tilt and the bat swing comps again. Like he just shakes his head at me, but I think it's worthwhile for me to try and be out in front of that. Not only to try and be right about players before other people in a fantasy sense, but also for people to kind of understand what teams are going through. I'm a year or two behind, of course, but you know, I'm doing my best to keep up with them.
For sure. And I mean, I think it's comparable to baseball, where if you you miss 7 out of 10 times, there's a chance you wind up in Cooperstown. You know what I mean? So there's a big piece there. But you mentioned fantasy, and a big part of your audience, myself included, lean heavily on the models we're discussing here for our decision making on draft day and also during the season. Stuff Plus and pitch shape metrics are incredibly powerful. I think we made that clear here. But fantasy managers often overreact to some early season spikes or maybe some noisy small samples by trying to be too far ahead. What's the most responsible way for us as fantasy managers to use Stuff Plus and pitch shape without getting fooled by that small sample size? And should we balance those early signals with context, maybe their role, and the point at which the metrics are actually stabilizing that we can say this is something real?
Yeah, I think the easiest way to think about it is how much do you know about a player? How long has he been in the league? How much do you know about a player? This helps with the Juan Soto thing too, honestly.
Mm-hmm.
Did we know that Juan Soto is a good player? Do we know he's probably one of the smartest players in the league? Do we have a bunch of results, on-field results that we can go to? Then start looking at the on-field results. Look at projections. Look at, Ks and walks and all those things. Look at what he's actually done on the field. The more you know about a player, the more you should look at what he's actually done on the field. The less you know about a player, the more you should look at something like stuff and bat speed. Mm-hmm. So if you have a guy who comes up and this didn't work out for Jack Caglione, but let's say Jack Caglione, Nick Kurtz, and another player come up, and you're choosing between the three in this fantasy world. Take Jack Caglione and Nick Kurtz because they swing the bat 78 miles an hour, and they can be a real power hitter. And maybe somebody like Luke Keeschel works out, but Luke Keeschel doesn't swing the bat hard, and he probably was over his skis power-wise, and you can still be right more often when you have to make that snap decision. So bat speed and Stuff Plus, they're for debuts. They're for a starter. They're for starts. They're for appearances 1 through 5. And then once you get past 5, something like strikeouts minus walks becomes really, really important. And you can start talking about, results on the field. But starts 1 through 5 of a career, I want to know about bat speed. I want to know about Stuff Plus.
So, as we wrap up here, I really appreciate you taking the time out of your busy schedule to hop on here and, talk about all the things. I really respect you as a baseball writer. And like I said, I rely on you in a genuine way, listening on a daily basis to rates and also reading all your work at The Athletic. And you spent most of your career helping fans understand the game on a deeper level. I think that's what we most enjoy about reading and listening to you talk. Pitch design, Stuff Plus, the aging curves, as we mentioned before, the bat speed, all of it. And when you zoom out 5 or 10 years, it still feels like we're only scratching the surface of what's measurable right now. The biomechanics, maybe neural processing, bat to ball precision, and fully individualized pitch design, as you were referencing before with some of the splitters. From your vantage point, what is the frontier of baseball analysis we're still underestimating? The area where a decade from now we'll look back and say, we had no idea how transformative this was going to be.
I mean, I think we're in the middle of it a little bit with the way bodies move, biomechanics. And so the next thing may just be the way our minds work. The problem is that's proprietary information. As a prospect, do I want to be like, okay, I'll put your brain helmet on while I hit? Probably not.
Right. No, I mean, that's the scary AI portion of the world of the context we're building in this world that we live in 2025.
AI is actually, you mentioned AI. That's pretty interesting too, because AI, large language models they can take deep troves of language, of words, and produce insights. And so I do think that'll produce some things too, because if you think about all of the coaching that is done, those are words that are used to try and produce outcomes. And if you found a way, and I know this sounds bad and it sounds like some sort of Gattaca type grossness, but like if you found a way to record the way that coaches talk to players and the way that front offices talk to each other, and if you found a way to record all these things, you might start finding insights about how are the best ways to run an organization. What's the best kind of organizational tree to have? Like what sort of pathways of autonomy and oversight should we have? But also on top of that, how should we speak to players? Like what are the right ways to speak to players? What are the right things to think about? So I do find, I do think that some teams are thinking about this and incorporating AI in a way to, for example, the Marlins right now are calling all the pitches from the dugout. Now because you're calling all the pitches from the dugout, there's a process that's created to create those pitch calling programs. That could be something that could be fed into AI to kind of get you better results in terms of calling the right pitches.
Very interesting stuff as we continue to adapt as baseball fans. That's all we can do, And I'll give you the platform here everyone's familiar with your work, but I'll give you the platform to talk about Rates and Barrels, potentially The Athletic, and also give us a recommendation for your favorite beer. I know you're a connoisseur of all things liquid beverages out there. I see you always posting and having great choices of what to drink.
Where are you guys based?
Devin and I are both on Long Island, New York. So we have Blue Point Brewing Company, Great South Bay are the ones closest to us. A lot of microbrewers as well. But biggest one, Anheuser-Busch owns Blue Point, but it's they've grown up in a big way now over here.
No, I like Threes out there, and I like Suarez. Suarez family makes these great lagers and pilsners. And as I get older, I'm drinking weaker beer.
That's the aging curve right there,
It is the aging curve right there. But yeah, we're almost daily. I think pretty much daily at Rates and Barrels. We've got Jed Lowry and Trevor May helping us understand hitters and pitchers. We kind of do a little bit more fantasy on Mondays and Fridays, and then in the middle of the week we're more regular baseball, trying to walk the line there a little bit. But I got this piece about Fromber and Scouting Command coming out, and we'll cover anything that happens. We'll provide analysis if anything happens as it happens. And I'm very happy to be on the show. Thank you for having me.
Well, thank you, and we'll be back in 1 second to wrap up the show. Have a great Thanksgiving,
You too.
All right, as we wrap up this episode, once again, want to thank Eno Sarris for popping on here and talking all things baseball. A great conversation. I really appreciate the time. You guys can check out his work on Rates and Barrels and, of course, The Athletic. Be sure to check out that piece he's going to be releasing with the Framber Valdez conversation where he fits as a free agent. And, of course, check out the works we were referencing during this episode, which was the conversation about those 4 biggest bargains that he found potentially this offseason. And all your fantasy news as well, you can get over there. But if you want to support our show, you can follow us at Tablesetters Pod on both Instagram and on Twitter. Devin will be back with me next episode. The only reason this didn't work out is because of the West Coast time. Wanted to accommodate Eno Sarris and make sure it happened. We were 2 ships in the night trying to make this happen. I'm so glad we were able to. But Devin will be back for episode 120, breaking down all things baseball. We should be back before Thanksgiving and talk all the things you guys need to know. And I want Devin's take on what's happening with the TV deal. There's been a lot of conversation on that. I think he's still reeling from the Grayson Rodriguez trade and still trying to process it, but maybe he'll have more understanding about why the Orioles do what they do. But until that time, we will talk to you after a while. And as always, happy baseball.
High fly ball into right field. She is gone. In a year that has been so improbable, the impossible